Tyler Ward chose the rooftop of a Manhattan hotel to erase his wife. Under crystal lights and investor applause, he lifted a champagne glass and thanked Natalie Ward for serving her purpose. He called her a stepping stone, a quiet chapter, a woman who had never built anything of her own. Chloe Bennett stood beside him, newly engaged, radiant in borrowed victory. Guests watched. Some looked down. No one interrupted. What Tyler did not know, what no one in that room knew, was that only hours earlier, Natalie had signed a $5 billion merger that would secure the very empire he was so eager to claim alone. He believed he was leaving a dependent wife. He was walking away from the architect of his future. If you believe dignity does not need to shout to be powerful, stay with this story. Don't miss what happens when silence meets evidence. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from and your local time. I always read those comments carefully. And if stories about justice, restraint, and quiet strength matter to you, consider subscribing. Now let's begin. Natalie Ward had never needed applause to measure her worth. Long before she became Mrs. Ward, long before Tyler's company was featured in glossy tech magazines, she had been a law student walking through the granite corridors of Columbia Law School with a leather notebook pressed against her ribs. She wrote everything down. Case citations, contract clauses, the pauses professors made before delivering a ruling that changed the meaning of a paragraph. She understood early that power rarely announced itself. It hid in footnotes, in definitions, in the difference between shall and may. Tyler Ward, on the other hand, had always preferred stages. They met at a networking reception in Manhattan 8 years earlier. Tyler was charismatic in a way that filled space. He spoke about disruption, about changing logistics infrastructure with predictive routing software. Investors gravitated toward him. He spoke with his hands with easy certainty, with the confidence of a man who believed the future was negotiable. Natalie had listened quietly. Later that night, she asked him a single question about liability exposure in cross-state data transfers. Tyler blinked. He had not considered it. He would later describe that moment as when he fell in love with her mind. What he truly fell in love with was the way her mind could protect his ambition. In the early years of the company Ward Dynamics, Natalie worked beside him at their dining table. She drafted the initial shareholder agreements. She structured the equity allocations so Tyler retained controlling interest without violating securities regulations. She inserted protective clauses that prevented hostile takeover attempts. When the first angel investors wired 6 figures into the company account, it was because Natalie had redlined their term sheet until it was legally survivable. Tyler became the face. Natalie became the architecture. She never corrected reporters when they credited Tyler alone. She never interrupted interviews to clarify that the convertible note structure had been her design. She believed in partnership and shared assent. For years, that belief held. Ward Dynamics expanded from a modest Manhattan office to a sleek glass building in Soho. Tyler appeared on business panels. His LinkedIn following multiplied. Podcasts invited him to discuss vision. Natalie remained general counsel in title, though her involvement extended far beyond legal oversight. She managed regulatory compliance in 3 states. She negotiated supply chain contracts. She oversaw risk mitigation strategies that quietly saved the company millions. She did not seek visibility. She sought stability. The first shift was subtle. Tyler began coming home later. At first, it was framed as growth, expansion into Florida markets, meetings with venture capitalists in Miami. He carried the scent of hotel soap and airport lounges. Natalie noticed details the way she always had. The frequency of off-site strategy sessions increased. His phone turned face down during dinner. A new cologne appeared expensive, sharp, unfamiliar. She did not ask who he was texting. She asked instead for updated quarterly expenditure reports. In the office, She began requesting full access to transactional logs rather than summary sheets. Mark Delgado, the company's CFO, hesitated only briefly before complying. Natalie had, after all, written the financial governance policies herself. What she saw did not immediately signal betrayal. It signaled carelessness. Transfers between subsidiary accounts were occurring without her co-signature. Small at first, then incrementally larger. When she inquired, Tyler laughed it off. "Operational flexibility," he said one evening, loosening his tie. "You worry too much." Natalie did not argue. She simply made a note. 2 months later, she noticed a newly registered LLC in Delaware, tied indirectly to Ward Dynamics' vendor chain. The filing listed a managing member whose name she did not recognize. She printed the document and placed it in her leather notebook. At night, she began backing up company emails to an encrypted external drive. Not out of suspicion of infidelity, out of professional instinct. If risk existed, she needed to understand its perimeter. Tyler mistook her quiet for indifference. In truth, Natalie's silence was analysis. Meanwhile, Ward Dynamics entered the most critical phase of its corporate life merger negotiations with a multinational transportation conglomerate. Seeking to integrate predictive routing technology into its global freight network, the potential valuation $5 billion. The board entrusted Natalie with leading the legal structuring. Harold Kensington, the silver-haired chairman whose experience spanned 4 decades of mergers, called her into his office personally. "I want this airtight," he said. "It will be," she replied. Tyler attended the early celebratory meetings, but drifted away from the granular discussions. He preferred investor dinners and media teasers. The intricacies of indemnity clauses and escrow accounts bored him. Natalie thrived in them. She spent 14-hour days refining representations and warranties. She negotiated earn-out structures that protected long-term shareholder value. She crafted provisions ensuring that control mechanisms would not destabilize executive leadership Tyler's leadership post-merger. Even as she noticed discrepancies in internal transfers, she shielded the company's future. At home, the emotional temperature shifted. Tyler became impatient with her focus. "You're always working," he said one night, scrolling through his phone. "So are you," she answered evenly. "It's different." He did not elaborate. Natalie watched him in moments he believed he was unobserved. The faint smile at incoming messages, the subtle straightening of posture when his phone buzzed. She recognized anticipation. Still, she did not confront him. Instead, she expanded her documentation. She archived voicemail records tied to corporate numbers. She cross-referenced timestamps between Tyler's travel receipts and unusual financial transfers. Patterns emerged, not dramatic, but directional. Risk was consolidating. And Natalie had built her life around understanding risk before it detonated. The merger negotiations intensified. Drafts moved back and forth between legal teams across time zones. Natalie mediated disputes over valuation metrics. She ensured that intellectual property ownership remained undisputed. In quiet conference rooms, she was decisive, calm, precise. No one in those rooms doubted her authority. At home, Tyler increasingly mistook that authority for emotional distance. He began sleeping on the far edge of the bed. One evening, as Natalie reviewed escrow account language, Tyler announced he would be flying to Miami for a brand partnership activation. Natalie nodded. "Safe flight," she said. After he left, she opened the company's internal expense portal. The Miami trip overlapped with a marketing influencer summit. Chloe Bennett's name appeared in the event's promotional materials. Natalie did not yet assign meaning to it. She simply saved the webpage as a PDF. The night before Tyler returned from Miami, Natalie finalized a crucial indemnification clause that would later protect the company from unforeseen liabilities. She sent the draft to Harold Kensington at 2:17 a.m. Then, she closed her laptop and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes of stillness. She was aware even then that something irreversible was approaching, not just in business, but in marriage. But Natalie Ward had never been a woman who reacted prematurely. She prepared. By the time Tyler walked back through their Manhattan townhouse door the next evening, sunburned and exhilarated, Natalie had already begun mapping the invisible lines that would define the next chapter of her life. She greeted him with composure. He kissed her cheek distractedly. In his mind, he was ascending. In hers, she was calculating. Neither of them yet understood that the documents accumulating quietly in her leather notebook would soon outweigh every speech he had ever given. And Natalie, as always, was paying attention. Chloe Bennett did not enter Tyler Ward's life quietly. She arrived in filtered light and curated captions. At 28, Chloe had built a digital presence large enough to command brand partnerships and first-class flights. Her content was a seamless rotation of rooftop cocktails, wellness retreats, and carefully angled laughter. She understood lighting. She understood timing. She understood how to look like a future someone else wanted. She met Tyler at a Technology and Lifestyle Convergence Summit in Miami, the same summit Natalie had archived as a PDF weeks earlier. Tyler had been invited to speak about innovation and infrastructure. Chloe had moderated a panel on luxury branding in a digital era. Their first interaction occurred backstage, where ambition is often most honest. Chloe recognized power the way she recognized camera angles. Tyler recognized admiration the way he recognized applause. The messages began that evening. At first, they were professional. Gratitude for the panel. Suggestions of collaboration between Ward Dynamics and Chloe's network. Then they shifted late-night humor, shared frustrations, subtle intimacy, disguised as mentorship. Natalie did not see the messages in real time. She saw the consequences. 3 weeks after Miami, Ward Dynamics processed a payment of $148,000 to a marketing consultancy registered in Florida. The consultancy had been incorporated only 2 months earlier. Natalie opened the file. The managing director was listed as a proxy. The beneficial owner field was left vague. She requested supporting documentation from Mark Delgado. Tyler approved it personally, Mark said over the phone tone, neutral but cautious. It's tied to a branding expansion. Send me the contract, Natalie replied. When the document arrived, she noticed immediately that the signature page lacked her required co-authorization. According to the company's governance framework, drafted by her transactions above $100,000 required dual executive sign-off. Tyler had signed alone. Natalie printed the contract. She did not confront him that evening. Instead, she logged into the company's expense portal and expanded her search parameters. Over the next hour, she identified 4 additional transfers routed through subsidiary accounts to the same consultancy. Individually, they were explainable. Collectively, they suggested pattern. At dinner, Tyler spoke animatedly about strategic repositioning. We need to look aspirational, he said. Global, not just logistics. Lifestyle integration. Natalie cut her salmon carefully. And the consultancy in Florida, she asked evenly. Tyler did not look up immediately. Brand development, he said. You always worry too much about paperwork. I worry about compliance. He exhaled. You don't trust me. Natalie considered the statement. Trust to her had always been tied to transparency, to signatures placed where they belonged, to clauses honored. I trust documentation, she answered. Tyler smiled thinly. Across the table, their marriage shifted by a fraction of a degree. Chloe's presence became gradually less discreet. A photograph surfaced online. Tyler and Chloe seated beside each other at a waterfront fundraiser. The caption described them as visionaries reshaping the future. Natalie saw the image the next morning while scanning industry news. She did not zoom in. She noted the timestamp. Later that week, Tyler extended his Miami stays by an additional night twice. The corporate card reflected hotel suite upgrades inconsistent with standard business accommodations. Natalie cross-referenced flight itineraries with transaction logs. Patterns continued to align. One evening, as Tyler showered upstairs, his phone vibrated repeatedly on the kitchen counter. Natalie did not reach for it. She did not need to. The notification banner lit briefly before dimming. Chloe counting the days. Natalie looked at the screen without touching it. Then she returned to her laptop. In her leather notebook, she began categorizing evidence into 3 columns: financial, procedural, personal. She understood the difference between emotional betrayal and fiduciary breach. One wounded privately, the other carried legal consequences. Tyler underestimated which one concerned her more. The merger negotiations intensified. Natalie flew twice to Chicago to meet with the acquiring corporation's legal team. She negotiated indemnity caps that would protect Ward Dynamics from legacy liabilities. She inserted disclosure schedules detailing every subsidiary, every contract, every pending obligation. Transparency was not optional in transactions of that magnitude. Meanwhile, within Ward Dynamics, a quiet tension emerged. Mark Delgado requested a private meeting. "I need to clarify something," he said, closing his office door. "Tyler has been directing certain transfers verbally." "Without documentation?" Natalie asked. "Yes." "Do you have records?" Mark hesitated. Then he slid a flash drive across the desk. "Audio confirmations," he said. "I recorded them after the second time." Natalie accepted the drive without visible reaction. "Thank you," she said. That night alone, in her home office, she listened. Tyler's voice was casual, confident. "Move the funds before filing," he said in one recording. "We don't need unnecessary oversight." Filing what Mark had asked. "You'll know when it's time." Natalie replayed the sentence twice. Before filing. The implication crystallized. Tyler was not merely reallocating company resources. He was preparing for separation, financially insulating himself before any formal announcement. Her hand remained steady as she labeled the file. She did not cry. She did not call him. She continued drafting merger language until 1:40 a.m. Chloe's digital presence grew bolder. Subtle hints became suggestive captions. A diamond bracelet appeared in her stories, one Natalie recognized from a recent credit card statement. Still, Natalie did not confront Tyler. She expanded her documentation. She accessed corporate registry databases and traced the Florida consultancy to a holding structure indirectly connected to Chloe's brother. The layers were thin, amateur. Tyler believed he was being strategic. He was being careless. At the next board meeting, Harold Kensington reviewed merger timelines. "We're close," he said. "Very close." Tyler nodded, distracted, checking his phone under the table. Natalie presented a comprehensive compliance report. No one questioned her data. When the meeting adjourned, Harold lingered. "You look tired," he observed gently. "I'm focused," Natalie replied. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "That's why we trust you." Trust. The word landed differently now. At home that evening, Tyler announced another trip. "Miami again?" Natalie asked. He did not deny it. "You're pulling away," he said instead. "You care more about contracts than about us." Natalie met his gaze calmly. "I care about what endures," she said. He shook his head, misunderstanding. The distance between them was no longer emotional. It was structural. Natalie had begun to see the architecture of collapse. Chloe, radiant and public, represented immediacy, attention without accountability. Tyler gravitated toward it instinctively. Natalie represented permanent systems, clauses, safeguards. The quiet mechanics that sustain empires long after applause fades. Tyler mistook one for love. He underestimated the other as power. By the time he boarded his next flight to Miami, Natalie had compiled a record of unauthorized financial transfers. Audio files confirming intent to move funds pre-filing. Corporate registry documents linking shell entities. Time-stamped digital evidence of personal expenditures misclassified as business costs. She encrypted the files. She updated her notebook. Then she turned back to the merger agreement, now in its final negotiation phase. If Tyler intended to step away from their marriage, he would do so, believing he controlled the outcome. Natalie would allow him that illusion. For now, because she understood something he did not, the timing of disclosure determines the balance of power. And she was not finished calculating. The final negotiation began at 6:30 a.m. in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the Hudson. Natalie Ward arrived 10 minutes early, as she always did. Her legal pad was already divided into columns: valuation adjustments, indemnity exposure, escrow release. Triggers executive retention clauses. Outside the windows, Manhattan moved in silver-blue morning light, indifferent to the scale of decisions about to be finalized inside. Across the table sat representatives from Titan Global Freight, the multinational conglomerate. Prepare to acquire Ward Dynamics in a transaction valuing the company at $5 billion. $5 billion. It was a number that would make headlines. To Natalie, it was a structure composed of terms, conditions, contingencies, and risk allocation. Harold Kensington, chairman of the board, gave her a brief nod as the meeting opened. "Let's finish this," he said. Tyler was present, but only nominally. He arrived 12 minutes late, coffee in hand, offering apologies about traffic. He smiled easily at Titan's executives, made a brief remark about transformative synergy, then leaned back as the legal teams began dissecting the final draft. Natalie led. She addressed the remaining disputes with surgical clarity. When Titan's counsel pushed for broader representations regarding proprietary software liabilities, Natalie countered with a narrowly tailored disclosure schedule supported by documented compliance audits. When they proposed adjusting the earn-out formula in a way that would dilute controlling shares over time, she redirected the formula through a performance-based metric that preserved executive voting rights. Tyler glanced at his phone 3 times during that exchange. He did not fully grasp that Natalie was safeguarding not only shareholder value, but his position as CEO post-merger. The most delicate section involved executive retention bonuses and stock acceleration triggers. If structured incorrectly, Tyler could lose significant leverage. If structured carefully, he would retain substantial influence and personal gain. Natalie structured it carefully. She inserted a clause tying accelerated equity vesting to continuous executive service, but defined service in a way that protected the company from abrupt, self-serving resignation. It was precise, balanced, defensive. It was invisible genius. By 11:47 a.m., the last contested provision was resolved. Titan's lead counsel extended his hand. "We're satisfied." Harold looked at Natalie. Counsel Natalie reviewed the final clean draft once more. Every cross-reference aligned, every exhibit attached, every signature block correctly formatted. "Yes," she said calmly. "We're ready to execute." The signing was not cinematic. There were no flash bulbs, only pens moving across thick paper. Natalie signed first as general counsel. Tyler signed second as CEO. Bank representatives confirmed wire instructions. At 12:32 p.m., the acquisition became legally binding. $5 billion. A transaction that would secure Ward Dynamics' future, elevate Tyler's public profile, and solidify board confidence for years. Natalie closed her folder. Her phone vibrated softly in her bag. She did not check it until she reached the hallway. When she did, she saw a message preview from an unknown number. A photograph. Tyler, on one knee. Chloe Bennett in a white dress, hands covering her mouth in staged astonishment. The timestamp, 12:18 p.m., 14 minutes before the merger was finalized. Natalie looked at the image without expression. The irony did not wound her. It clarified her. Tyler had chosen spectacle at the exact hour she secured his legacy. He believed he was ascending independently. He had no idea his name was embedded across 487 pages of contractual protection she had just signed. She slid her phone back into her bag. Inside the conference room, Titan executives discussed press release timing. The public announcement would be scheduled for the following week after regulatory filings. Confidentiality remained absolute until then. Natalie understood that silence could be strategic. She returned to the table and participated in logistical planning, as if nothing personal had shifted. Tyler, meanwhile, was texting rapidly under the table. Later that afternoon, as they rode the elevator down to the lobby, Tyler seemed unusually buoyant. "Big day," he said. "Yes," Natalie agreed. "You should come out tonight. Celebrate." With the board, no something else. His eyes flickered with anticipation. Natalie met his gaze briefly. "I have documents to finalize," she said. He laughed softly as though her dedication were quaint. By evening, Manhattan's sky had darkened into deep indigo. Natalie sat alone in her office at home, reviewing wire confirmations. The escrow account reflected the initial transfer and advance component of the acquisition structure. Numbers aligned exactly as negotiated. $5 billion was not immediate liquidity. It was structured across stock exchange cash consideration and performance contingencies. But the architecture was solid, secure, sustainable. Her email inbox chimed. "Harold Kensington, exceptional work today, Natalie. The board owes you more than gratitude." She responded simply. It was a collective effort. At 8:14 p.m., her phone buzzed again. A message from Tyler. "Be ready by 9. Formal." Natalie looked at the screen. She knew. She did not need explanation. Still, she dressed with understated precision, a navy silk dress, minimal jewelry. Her composure was not costume. It was discipline. The rooftop venue overlooked the city in glittering panorama. Investors, colleagues, media affiliates gathered under suspended lantern lights. Tyler stood at the center of it all, radiant with attention. Chloe stood beside him in white. Natalie entered quietly. Conversations dimmed only slightly as guests registered the arrangement. Some sensed tension but lacked context. Tyler tapped a glass with a fork. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began. "It's a night about new beginnings." Natalie felt the shift before the words arrived. He spoke of growth, of evolution, of recognizing when chapters have run their course. Then he turned toward Chloe and lowered himself onto one knee. Applause erupted before the sentence fully formed. Natalie stood still as Tyler declared his love publicly, his certainty, his future. He thanked Natalie briefly for being part of the journey. A pause, a stepping stone. The phrase hovered in the warm night air. No one in that room knew that hours earlier, Natalie had secured the transaction that made Tyler's public persona possible. No one knew the clauses bearing his protection. No one knew the encrypted files resting on her home office desk. Tyler looked at her, once perhaps expecting reaction. Natalie gave him none. Her silence was not shock. It was assessment. She observed the investors calculating implications, the board members exchanging restrained glances, the faint flicker of discomfort in Harold Kensington's expression. Chloe accepted the ring with theatrical joy. Flashbulbs ignited. Tyler raised their joined hands triumphantly. In that moment, he believed he had rewritten his narrative. He believed he had stepped forward into a brighter chapter. Natalie watched, aware of something he was not. Legal timelines had already begun ticking. The merger agreement included disclosure requirements regarding executive conduct and fiduciary compliance. The financial transfers she had documented carried implications beyond marriage. She did not need to respond publicly. The architecture of consequence was already in place. When the applause softened and champagne circulated, Natalie stepped away quietly. She did not interrupt the celebration. She did not confront Chloe. She did not cry in the restroom, as some might have expected. Instead, she left the rooftop and descended alone in the elevator, the city's reflection fracturing across mirrored walls. In the lobby, she paused briefly. $5 billion. A public proposal, unauthorized financial transfers, audio recordings, shell companies. All of it intersected now. Tyler believed he had chosen freedom. He had not yet understood the weight of documentation. Natalie stepped into the night air and hailed a car. As Manhattan lights streaked past the window, She opened her phone and drafted a single email. To Rebecca Lawson. Subject: immediate legal consultation. She did not include details. Only a request for a meeting at 7:30 a.m. Then she closed her eyes briefly, not in grief, but in recalibration. By the time Tyler finished celebrating under rooftop lights, Natalie had already begun transitioning from wife to witness. And witnesses, when prepared, do not need to raise their voices. The elevator doors had closed on the rooftop applause, but the sound lingered in Natalie Ward's ears long after she stepped into the night. Back upstairs, Tyler Ward was still smiling for photographs. By the time he returned home past midnight, slightly flushed from champagne and validation, Natalie was seated at the dining table with her laptop open and a single legal pad placed neatly beside it. She was not crying. She was organizing. Rebecca Lawson arrived at 7:28 a.m. Rebecca was the kind of attorney who wore navy suits without ornament and spoke in measured sentences that did not waste air. She had built her reputation in high-asset divorce litigation and corporate fiduciary disputes. She did not dramatize betrayal. She quantified it. Natalie poured coffee. "I assume this is not impulsive," Rebecca said as she sat down. "It is not," Natalie replied. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed financial transfers, corporate registry filings, and transcripts from the audio recordings Mark Delgado had provided. Rebecca reviewed them silently. "How long?" she asked. "The financial irregularities began 4 months ago," Natalie answered. "The personal relationship appears to overlap that timeline." Rebecca nodded. "And the merger executed yesterday at 12:32 p.m. Rebecca's eyes lifted briefly. "And the proposal, approximately 14 minutes prior." Silence settled, not heavy with sympathy, but dense with calculation. Rebecca closed the folder. "You understand," she said, "that this is no longer only marital misconduct." "I do." Tyler had misjudged something fundamental about Natalie. He had assumed that humiliation would provoke emotion. That emotion would lead to confrontation. That confrontation could be dismissed as instability. Instead, Natalie had responded with documentation. Rebecca outlined the immediate steps: file for divorce in New York Supreme Court, petition for emergency financial restraints to prevent further asset dissipation, notify the court of potential fiduciary breaches, preserve all digital evidence under litigation hold. Natalie listened carefully. "I don't want spectacle," she said. "I want protection." "You'll have it," Rebecca replied. By 9:15 a.m., the first legal motions were drafted. Meanwhile, Tyler was asleep in the master bedroom, unaware that the legal clock had started. When he woke at 10:40 a.m., he found Natalie dressed for work. "You left early," he said casually. "Yes." He stretched, confident, relaxed. "Last night was overdue," he added. Natalie looked at him steadily. "I imagine it was." He seemed almost relieved that she did not argue. "This is better for everyone," he continued. "We've been drifting." Natalie nodded once. "When did you intend to file?" she asked. Tyler hesitated. What the divorce? Before or after moving company funds, his expression flickered barely. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying," she said. "I'm asking." He straightened defensively. "You're overthinking. The company's fine." Natalie studied him for a moment, then picked up her briefcase. "Good," she said quietly. "Then transparency shouldn't be a problem." She left before he could respond. At Ward Dynamics headquarters, the atmosphere was subtly altered. News of the engagement had traveled fast through internal channels. Staff whispered. Some avoided Natalie's gaze out of misplaced discomfort. She acknowledged each greeting calmly. In the executive suite, Harold Kensington requested a private meeting. "I saw the photos," he said without preamble. Natalie sat across from him. "So did I." Harold folded his hands. "Is this going to affect the merger?" "Not if governance protocols are followed," she replied. "Have they been?" Natalie held his gaze. "Not consistently." Harold's jaw tightened. "Explain." She outlined the unauthorized transfers, the shell entity, the missing co-signatures without embellishment, without accusation. Harold listened in silence. "Do you have proof?" he asked finally. "Yes." She did not offer it yet. Timing mattered. That afternoon, Rebecca filed the divorce petition along with a motion for temporary financial restraints. The court clerk stamped it at 3:42 p.m. Simultaneously, notices were prepared to freeze joint accounts pending judicial review. By 5:15 p.m., Tyler's phone began to vibrate repeatedly. He was in Chloe's downtown apartment when the first bank alert arrived. Account access temporarily restricted, then another. Corporate expenditure review initiated. He frowned, dialing his private banker. "What's going on?" he demanded. "There's been a court filing," the banker replied cautiously. "We're obligated to comply." Tyler's confidence wavered. "A filing, yes, Mr. Ward. A petition requesting financial review and asset preservation." Chloe, seated nearby, watched his expression change. "What is it?" she asked. Tyler muted the call. "It's nothing," he said too quickly. But it was not nothing. By evening, he was driving home faster than he had in months. Natalie was in her office when he entered, holding printed court documents. "What is this?" he demanded. She closed her laptop slowly. "It's a petition. You froze our accounts. I requested protection of marital and corporate assets pending review. You blindsided me." Natalie considered the word. "You proposed publicly without prior discussion," she said evenly. "We're both capable of surprise." He paced the room. "You're trying to punish me?" "No," she replied. "I'm trying to preserve documentation." He stopped. "What documentation?" Natalie opened a drawer and removed a single sheet, a transcript excerpt from one of the audio recordings. She placed it on the desk between them. Tyler's eyes scanned the page. Moved the funds before filing. Color drained slightly from his face. You recorded me, Mark Delgado did." Tyler exhaled sharply. "This is corporate maneuvering. You're twisting it." "I don't need to twist it," she said quietly. "It's timestamped." He looked at her as though seeing her clearly for the first time. "You've been building a case. I've been observing risk." His anger faltered into uncertainty. Chloe texted him twice during the silence. He did not respond. "This doesn't have to be ugly," he said finally. "It doesn't," Natalie agreed. "Transparency prevents ugliness." He sank into a chair. "You wouldn't destroy the company. I built safeguards to protect it." "And me?" Natalie held his gaze. "I protected your position in the merger yesterday." He blinked. "What, you retained executive acceleration rights because of clauses I negotiated?" Confusion deepened across his face. "You're lying. I'm not." She slid a copy of the signed merger agreement across the desk and indicated the relevant section. His name appeared repeatedly, secured, protected, elevated. The realization unsettled him more than accusation would have. "You signed that yesterday?" he asked. "At 12:32 p.m., and you knew about—" "Yes." Silence settled between them. Tyler had believed himself decisive, powerful ahead. He was only now understanding that Natalie had been operating on a different timeline entirely. "You humiliated me," he said weakly. Natalie regarded him calmly. "No," she replied. "You did that yourself." There was no triumph in her voice, only fact. Outside the townhouse windows, Manhattan continued its indifferent motion. Inside, the balance had shifted. Tyler had mistaken quiet for weakness. He was beginning to understand that quiet could also be preparation. And the legal process, once initiated, did not move according to emotion. It moved according to evidence. The first official notice from the court arrived 2 days later. It was not dramatic. It did not carry accusation in bold letters. It simply outlined temporary financial restraints, pending judicial review, prohibiting either party from transferring, concealing, or dissipating marital assets. Tyler read it twice in his office at Ward Dynamics. For the first time since the rooftop proposal, he felt something unfamiliar: containment. Across town, Natalie sat in Rebecca Lawson's conference room, reviewing the next procedural steps. "We move carefully," Rebecca said. "No press statements, no emotional filings. We let documentation speak." Natalie nodded. "I don't want spectacle. You won't get it from me," Rebecca replied. On the polished oak table between them lay 3 organized binders: corporate financial transfers, audio transcripts, corporate registry, and shell entities. Rebecca opened the first binder. The offshore account in the Cayman Islands, she said. How confident are you in the traceability? Very Natalie answered. The initial funding source ties back to Ward Dynamics' operating account. The transfer was divided into 3 increments to avoid automatic internal flagging. Rebecca's eyebrows lifted slightly. He thought that would obscure it. It obscures summary reports, Natalie said calmly, not forensic review. They moved to the audio transcripts. Rebecca adjusted her glasses. Move the funds before filing. That language implies intent. It does. And the filing he referenced, likely divorce. Possibly restructuring of personal holdings prior to public disclosure. Rebecca closed the binders slowly. This shifts from marital betrayal to potential fiduciary misconduct. Natalie did not react outwardly. I understand. Meanwhile, Tyler convened an emergency meeting with Mark Delgado. Why did you record me? Tyler demanded once the door was shut. Mark remained seated. Because you asked me to execute transfers without documentation. You work for me. I work for the company, Mark corrected quietly. Tyler paced. Did you give her the recordings? Yes. Tyler stopped moving. You've chosen sides. Mark hesitated. I've chosen compliance. The distinction unsettled Tyler more than defiance would have. In the days following the court filing, small but significant shifts began unfolding inside Ward Dynamics. Banks required dual authorization for any transaction above routine operating thresholds. Internal audit teams initiated reviews under board directive. Harold Kensington requested updated financial summaries. Tyler, accustomed to unilateral momentum, found himself slowed at every turn. Chloe noticed the change almost immediately. They were seated in her apartment overlooking the East River when she asked, "Why can't you access your investment account? It's temporary." Tyler replied, irritation barely masked. Because of her, he didn't answer directly. It's legal procedure. Chloe leaned back, studying him. You said everything was handled. It is. But it wasn't. Natalie's strategy was not aggressive, it was methodical. She did not accuse Tyler publicly. She did not brief journalists. She continued reporting to the office each morning at 8:00 a.m., reviewing merger integration schedules and regulatory compliance checklists. Her composure unsettled those who expected collapse. At home, the townhouse had become a neutral zone. Natalie had moved into the guest bedroom without announcement. They passed each other in hallways with restrained civility. One evening, Tyler attempted negotiation. We can settle this privately, he said. No need for a drawn-out process. Natalie looked up from her tablet. A private settlement requires full disclosure. You already know everything. I know what I've documented. His jaw tightened. You're enjoying this. No, she said. I'm ensuring accuracy. He exhaled sharply. You're turning this into a corporate audit. It became one when company funds were involved. The truth of that sentence lingered. Tyler had assumed his actions were compartmentalized personal choices separate from professional consequence. Natalie understood that in closely held companies, those lines rarely remained clean. The following week, Rebecca filed a supplemental motion requesting expanded financial discovery. The language remained neutral, procedural, rooted in fiduciary standards. Tyler's legal counsel responded with objections, arguing irrelevance, disputing scope. Judge Caroline Mercer scheduled a preliminary hearing. The date 3 weeks away. Time Natalie knew was an ally to those prepared. During that interval, she intensified documentation. She requested full vendor payment histories under routine compliance review. She cross-checked digital signatures against authorized signatory logs. She flagged discrepancies quietly to the board's audit committee. Harold Kensington requested a private conversation. This will reach the board formally, he said. Are you prepared for that? Yes. And if it implicates Tyler beyond divorce? Natalie met his gaze. My obligation is to the company. Harold nodded slowly. You built this framework, he said. You know how it holds. I do. That night alone in her office, Natalie reviewed the merger's executive conduct clause. It contained language requiring disclosure of any material financial misconduct that could affect leadership integrity. Tyler had never read that section carefully. She had drafted it. Chloe's confidence began to fracture in smaller, quieter ways. Invitations to high-profile events slowed when rumors of financial review surfaced. Brand partners requested clarification. A lifestyle magazine postponed a feature profile on tech's new power couple. Why are they hesitating? Chloe asked one evening. Because they're cautious, Tyler said. It'll pass. But his tone lacked conviction. The containment Natalie initiated was not explosive. It was cumulative. Every frozen account, every compliance inquiry, every board request tightened the perimeter around Tyler's autonomy. He began sleeping poorly. He reread the merger documents, searching for leverage he had overlooked. He found none. Natalie had protected his executive compensation, ironically securing benefits he might now lose through his own conduct. The irony deepened each day. 3 nights before the preliminary hearing, Tyler stood outside Natalie's office door. You could end this, he said quietly. She looked up. I could, she agreed. Then why don't you? Because ending it prematurely would leave questions unanswered. You're dismantling everything. I'm documenting everything. Silence stretched. You loved me, he said finally. Natalie considered the statement without flinching. I respected what we built, she answered. The distinction mattered. He walked away without another word. In the stillness that followed, Natalie closed her laptop and allowed herself one measured breath. This was not revenge. Revenge was impulsive, loud, emotional. This was governance. This was evidence. This was a woman who understood that power did not need spectacle to assert itself. As the preliminary hearing approached, the architecture of consequence stood nearly complete. Tyler still believed he could negotiate outcome through persuasion. Natalie knew outcome would emerge through a record. And records once assembled do not negotiate. They endure. Forensic accounting does not arrive with sirens. It arrives with spreadsheets. 3 days before the preliminary hearing, Ward Dynamics' internal audit committee initiated what was formally described as a routine post-merger compliance review. The phrase was deliberate, neutral, unalarming. Natalie had suggested the timing carefully. Merger integration required financial transparency. No one could object to that without appearing negligent. In a quiet conference room on the 17th floor, 2 external forensic accountants from a respected Manhattan firm opened laptops and began reconstructing transaction flows. Tyler was not informed in advance. He learned of it when Mark Delgado forwarded the internal memo. What is this? Tyler demanded, striding into Mark's office. Standard integration review, Mark replied evenly. Board directive. Tyler scanned the memo. This is because of her. It's because of the merger, Mark corrected. Tyler's jaw tightened. He could not oppose the audit without raising suspicion. He returned to his office and shut the door harder than necessary. Meanwhile, Natalie sat with Rebecca Lawson, reviewing discovery responses submitted by Tyler's legal team. They were incomplete, narrow, carefully worded to avoid admission. He's minimizing exposure, Rebecca observed. He's assuming surface review, Natalie replied. Rebecca studied her client for a moment. You anticipated this. I anticipated risk. Across town, the forensic accountants began tracing the first irregular transfer, $148,000 routed to the Florida consultancy. They followed the digital trail Ward Dynamics operating account, marketing allocation subaccount, Delaware Shell LLC, Florida consultancy. Layered, but not sophisticated. One accountant adjusted his glasses. He split larger sums into staggered transfers, he said quietly to his colleague, likely to avoid automated internal thresholds. They continued mapping. Additional transfers surfaced consulting fees, branding expenses, event sponsorship allocations. Individually defensible, collectively disproportionate. By the end of the first day, a preliminary summary was drafted. It did not accuse. It quantified. Tyler spent that evening at Chloe's apartment restless. "They're auditing marketing," he said. Chloe frowned. "So, it's branding. It's more than that." She watched him pace. "You said everything was clean." "It is." But his voice lacked certainty. Chloe's confidence had been anchored to Tyler's aura of control. Each visible crack unsettled her. Back at the townhouse, Natalie reviewed a different set of documents. She had accessed archived corporate governance records policies she had drafted years earlier. One clause stood out. Any executive officer engaging in financial transactions outside established authorization thresholds shall be subject to board review and potential suspension pending investigation. Tyler had signed that policy personally. Natalie placed a tab on the page. The next morning, the forensic accountants requested additional documentation from Mark Delgado, specifically related to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Tyler intercepted the request. "There is no offshore account tied to corporate funds," he insisted. Mark hesitated. "The trace indicates otherwise." Tyler's face hardened. "You're making assumptions," No, Mark said quietly. "We're following numbers." Numbers did not argue. They accumulated. At 3:17 p.m., the accountants produced a transaction flowchart spanning 12 pages. Lines crisscrossed between entities, subsidiaries holding companies' consultancies. At the center, Tyler's executive authorization code appeared repeatedly. Harold Kensington reviewed the preliminary findings that evening. He requested a private call with Natalie. "Is this what you expected?" he asked. "Yes. And the signature discrepancies, I have copies." Natalie forwarded scanned documents showing her signature digitally affixed to transfer approvals on dates she had been physically out of state. Harold exhaled slowly. "This borders on forgery." "It does. Why didn't you bring this sooner?" "Because timing matters." Silence. "You're certain of your position?" Harold asked carefully. "I am." At home that night, Tyler opened his laptop and began reviewing archived emails. He searched for leverage. He found messages where Natalie had advised caution, recommended compliance, suggested oversight. There was no trace of complicity. He had assumed she was uninvolved. He had not realized she was documenting. 3 nights before the hearing, Tyler attempted one more conversation. Natalie was seated at the dining table reviewing escrow release schedules. "We need to talk," he said. "We are," she replied calmly. "This forensic review, did you initiate it? I recommended compliance. You're setting me up." "No," she said. "I'm allowing structure to function." He ran a hand through his hair. "You could stop this. I could delay it. Then delay it." Natalie looked at him steadily. "Why?" "Because this will damage the company. It will damage misconduct," she corrected. He stared at her. "You've changed." "No," she said softly. "I haven't." That was what unsettled him most. Natalie was the same woman who had drafted shareholder protections, negotiated investor terms, built frameworks that shielded Ward dynamics from external threat. The only difference now was that the threat was internal, and she was responding exactly as she always had through policy. The following afternoon, the forensic accountants delivered a formal interim report to the board. Key findings: $2.3 million in aggregated transfers routed through shell entities. Evidence of authorization bypassing dual signature requirement. Digital signature inconsistencies. Offshore account linkage requiring further investigation. Harold Kensington called an emergency executive session. Tyler was summoned. He entered the boardroom to find printed binders placed before each director. Natalie was present not as wife, but as general counsel. She did not speak first. Harold did. "These findings require explanation," he said. Tyler glanced at Natalie. "This is exaggerated," he replied. "Brand expansion costs." Harold slid the flowchart across the table. "Brand expansion does not require offshore routing." Tyler's pulse quickened. "You're overreacting," Natalie finally spoke. Section 4.2 of our executive governance policy, she said evenly, requires disclosure of material financial deviations. She turned to the relevant page. You signed this policy. Silence deepened. One board member cleared his throat. Did you authorize these transfers without required co-signature? Tyler hesitated. They were time-sensitive. That is not an answer, Harold said quietly. The weight of documentation pressed against the room. Tyler looked at Natalie again, searching for something mercy, hesitation, partnership. She offered none, only composure. The meeting adjourned without resolution, but something irreversible had shifted. Tyler walked out not as unchallenged CEO, but as an executive under review. Outside Manhattan, traffic flowed indifferently. Inside the company, he believed he commanded governance mechanisms were activating exactly as Natalie had designed them years earlier. That night, she returned home alone. She did not feel triumph, only inevitability. Forensic accounting had done what confrontation could not. It had replaced argument with arithmetic. And arithmetic, once verified, does not bend to charisma. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. in a high-ceiling courtroom at the New York Supreme Court. There were no cameras allowed, no public spectacle. Only polished wooden benches, muted murmurs, and the steady rhythm of procedure. Natalie arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in charcoal gray. Rebecca Lawson stood beside her, reviewing final notes. Across the aisle, Tyler sat with his attorney, Jonathan Pierce, a seasoned litigator known for aggressive cross-examination and strategic delay. Tyler avoided Natalie's eyes. Judge Caroline Mercer entered precisely on time. She was known for precision and impatience with theatrics. This matter concerns temporary financial restraints and expanded discovery requests, she began. We will proceed efficiently. Rebecca stood first. Your Honor, the petitioner seeks continued asset preservation due to documented irregular financial transfers involving marital and potentially corporate funds. Jonathan rose immediately. The respondent disputes characterization of these transfers as irregular. They represent business-related expenditures within executive discretion. Judge Mercer looked down at the file. Executive discretion does not supersede fiduciary duty, she said calmly. Rebecca presented a concise summary: bank records, transaction, flows, authorization gaps. No embellishment, no emotional language. When the audio transcript was referenced, Jonathan objected. Improperly obtained. Rebecca responded evenly. Recorded by the company's CFO during routine compliance documentation. Judge Mercer lifted her gaze toward Tyler. Mr. Ward, were you aware that dual authorization was required for these transfers? Tyler shifted slightly. In urgent circumstances, I acted within what I believed was my executive authority. That is not what I asked, the judge replied. Silence. Yes, he admitted finally. Dual authorization is policy. Judge Mercer made a brief note. The hearing concluded without dramatic exchange. The judge extended financial restraints and granted expanded discovery, including forensic review of offshore accounts. This court expects full transparency from both parties, she said. Failure to comply will have consequences. The gavel struck once. It was a small sound, but it carried weight. Outside the courthouse, Jonathan leaned toward Tyler. We contain this, he said quietly. Limit exposure, discredit the scope. Tyler nodded, though uncertainty lingered in his posture. Across the steps, Natalie and Rebecca spoke briefly. He's contained for now, Rebecca said. Next phase will determine severity. Natalie nodded. Then we proceed. Back at Ward Dynamics, the board convened again, this time formally. The interim forensic report had circulated among directors overnight. The mood was measured, but tense. Harold Kensington opened the session. We are obligated to protect shareholder interests, he began. The findings require action. Tyler sat at the far end of the table, hands clasped tightly. This is premature, he said. There's no criminal finding, no regulatory violation. Yet one director replied quietly. Natalie was present in her capacity as general counsel. She did not lead. she observed. Harold turned to her. From a governance standpoint, what is required? Natalie spoke calmly. Executive review pending full forensic analysis. Temporary suspension of unilateral financial authority. Appointment of interim financial oversight. Tyler's head snapped toward her. You're recommending suspension. I'm recommending compliance with our own policies. Harold exhaled slowly. Vote, he said. Hands rose one by one. The decision passed. Tyler Ward was not removed as CEO. But he was restricted. Financial approvals now required board oversight. Audit access was expanded. His executive autonomy narrowed. It was not a public fall. It was a controlled descent. When the meeting adjourned, Tyler remained seated as others exited. Natalie gathered her documents methodically. You didn't have to push this, he said without looking at her. I didn't push, she replied. I referenced policy. You're enjoying watching me cornered. Natalie paused. If I wanted you cornered, she said quietly, I would have chosen a different method. She left before he could respond. Chloe felt the shift even before Tyler explained it. They were seated in a quiet restaurant downtown when he said the board's implementing temporary oversight. Oversight, she repeated. Standard procedure. Because of her. He didn't answer. Chloe's fork stilled. Is there something I should know? No. But hesitation lingered long enough for doubt to root. Her lifestyle partnerships were built on stability, visibility, without scandal. The word forensic had begun circulating quietly in financial circles. It made her uneasy. Meanwhile, discovery requests expanded. Rebecca's office received additional banking disclosures linking the Cayman account to a holding structure registered under a proxy attorney. The proxy had previously represented Chloe's brother in a minor civil case 3 years earlier. Connections were thin but traceable. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. He layered it, she said. Poorly, Natalie replied. You're not angry? Rebecca observed. Natalie considered the question. Anger wastes clarity. At home, the townhouse had grown silent in a different way. Tyler moved through rooms as though they sensed they no longer belonged to him fully. Natalie had relocated important documents to a secure off-site storage facility. Shared accounts remained frozen. One evening, Tyler stood in the doorway of the guest room. Is this what you wanted? He asked. Natalie looked up from her laptop. What to dismantle everything? I wanted transparency, she said. You could have talked to me. I did, she replied. You called it overthinking. The memory lingered between them. He stepped inside the room. You're turning my life into an audit. You turned our marriage into a transaction, she answered calmly. Silence followed. Tyler searched her face for vulnerability, for a crack in composure. There was none. Only steadiness. Across the city, Titan Global Freight finalized public announcement materials for the merger. Press releases were drafted. Financial analysts prepared commentary. The public narrative still painted Tyler Ward as visionary CEO, leading a landmark acquisition. The internal narrative was more complicated. 3 days later, a regulatory inquiry letter arrived, routine in post-merger scenarios, but now layered with additional context due to ongoing review. The letter requested clarification regarding executive compensation disclosures and financial governance. Harold forwarded it to Natalie. Expected, she replied. She drafted the response carefully precise, factual, omitting nothing. Tyler read the draft before submission. You're exposing me, he said. I'm protecting the company, she corrected. He exhaled slowly. You've already decided the outcome. No, she said. The documentation has. The difference mattered. Natalie did not control consequence. She had simply preserved record. As the days passed, Tyler's authority continued to narrow, not through dramatic confrontation, but through compliance mechanisms, activating exactly as designed. He had believed power resided in declaration. Natalie understood it resided in structure. And structures once set in motion did not respond to ego. They responded to evidence. The wedding was smaller than Chloe had once imagined. It took place on a private terrace in Tribeca, with a skyline view curated for photographs and a guest list trimmed to those unlikely to ask complicated questions. The original Vision destination vows in Lake Como, a designer spread in a lifestyle magazine, had quietly dissolved in the weeks following the court hearing. Tyler insisted on moving forward. "Optics," he said when Chloe hesitated. "We can't look unstable." Chloe smiled for the planner, for the florist, for the photographer adjusting the light. But beneath the practiced composure, she felt something tightening. Stability, she was beginning to understand, did not come from declarations. It came from numbers that remained accessible. On the morning of the ceremony, Tyler's phone buzzed twice with alerts from his legal team. He silenced it. Natalie, meanwhile, was seated in a different conference room across Manhattan, reviewing supplemental forensic findings with Rebecca and 2 accountants. No one mentioned the wedding. The second phase of financial review had expanded beyond the initial $2.3 million. When layered with indirect transfers, consulting reimbursements, and offshore allocations, the total exposure approached $3.8 million. Not catastrophic for a company valued at $5 billion, but not negligible either. The accountants had identified another pattern: timing. Several transfers had been executed within 48 hours of key marital milestones: Chloe's birthday, Valentine's Day, the Miami summit. Personal expenses misclassified under strategic branding initiatives. Rebecca tapped a column on the spreadsheet. "These are not defensible as corporate growth costs," she said. "No," Natalie agreed. "And the offshore account, still active," one accountant replied. "But frozen under court restraint." Natalie nodded once. "Preserve everything." By late afternoon, Chloe stood beneath an arch of white roses and exchanged vows with Tyler in front of 30 carefully selected witnesses. He spoke confidently about new beginnings and courage to choose happiness. She spoke about building something authentic. No one mentioned the pending asset discovery. No one mentioned the forensic audit. From a distance, it looked like renewal. Up close, it felt like acceleration. 3 days later, the fractures began to show. Chloe attempted to access a joint investment account Tyler had assured her would fund their honeymoon in St. Bart's. Access denied. She called him immediately. "It's temporary," he repeated. "Everything is temporary," she said, irritation surfacing for the first time. He drove to the bank that afternoon, only to be reminded again that judicial restraints remained active. Back at Ward Dynamics Titan, Global Freight finalized its public announcement of the merger. The press release was precise. Ward Dynamics acquired in $5 billion strategic integration. Tyler Ward was quoted as visionary founder. Natalie Ward was quoted as general counsel and lead architect of the transaction. It was the first time her name appeared publicly beside his, in a corporate context. Financial media took note. Industry analysts praised the legal sophistication of the deal structure. Several highlighted the retention safeguards embedded in the agreement. Tyler read those analyses with mixed emotion, pride, and something like unease. In the boardroom, Harold Kensington addressed executive leadership. With public scrutiny increasing, he said, "We cannot afford ambiguity." He turned toward Natalie. "Are we prepared for further regulatory inquiry?" "Yes," she replied. "And if internal findings escalate, we proceed according to governance." Tyler remained silent. Later that evening, he confronted her in the townhouse foyer. "You didn't have to let them quote you," he said. "I didn't let them," she answered. "They reviewed the filings. You're stepping into visibility. I'm responding to fact." He exhaled sharply. "You're making me look incompetent." Natalie regarded him calmly. "The documents speak for themselves." Chloe felt the shift in tone when Tyler returned home that night. He was quieter, tighter. "You said the merger made everything secure," she said carefully. "It did. Then why are accounts still restricted? Because she's dragging it out." Chloe hesitated. "Are you sure this is just about divorce?" Tyler's silence was answer enough. Meanwhile, Rebecca filed a motion requesting temporary spousal maintenance calculation based on full executive compensation disclosure, including deferred bonuses and equity acceleration tied to the merger. Jonathan Pierce objected immediately. Speculative, he argued in written response. Premature valuation. Rebecca countered with documentation from the merger agreement clauses Natalie herself had drafted. Judge Mercer scheduled another hearing. The timeline was tightening. At Ward Dynamics, investors requested reassurance. A private call was arranged with major stakeholders. Harold spoke first. "The merger remains intact," he said. "Governance procedures are functioning as designed." An investor asked directly, "Is executive misconduct implicated?" Harold chose his words carefully. "Review is ongoing." The market responded with caution, but not panic. Tyler listened to the call in silence. He was no longer the unquestioned voice of stability. He was a variable. That realization unsettled him more than any accusation. Chloe's social media presence shifted subtly. Fewer extravagant posts, more neutral imagery. Followers began speculating in comment sections. She disabled replies on several photos. One evening, she confronted Tyler openly. "Is there a risk this becomes public?" He hesitated too long. "Define risk," he said finally. Her expression hardened. "I didn't marry into scandal." "You married into growth," he replied. She looked at him steadily. "I married into certainty." The distinction lingered. Across town, Natalie finalized a detailed financial summary for Rebecca, categorizing assets, liabilities, projected executive compensation, and exposure risk. Her movements remained measured. No anger, no celebration, just precision. She had not initiated Tyler's unraveling. She had preserved record. The unraveling was procedural. 3 nights before the next court date, Chloe packed a suitcase quietly. Tyler noticed. "What are you doing, staying with my sister for a few days?" "Why?" She looked at him carefully. "Because I need clarity." He stepped closer. "This will stabilize," when she asked. He did not answer. She left the next morning before sunrise. Tyler stood alone in the apartment they had once described as a beginning. Across the river in the townhouse that no longer felt like a shared home, Natalie reviewed one final document before bed, an updated forensic addendum. It included confirmation that one offshore transfer had been executed using a digitally replicated version of her authorization key. Not merely bypassed, replicated. She closed the file and turned off the lamp. The sound of the city outside was steady, unconcerned. Tyler had believed the fracture would occur within marriage. He was only now beginning to see that the deeper fracture was structural. And structures, once compromised, do not fail all at once. They weaken, gradually, until even celebration cannot disguise instability. The boardroom felt different that morning. Not louder, quieter. The kind of quiet that precedes irreversible decisions. A special executive session had been called at 8:00 a.m. Sharp. All directors were present. Legal counsel dialed in remotely. The forensic accountants sat along the wall with their binders open, tabs marking key findings. Tyler arrived exactly on time. He wore the same confidence he had worn for years into investor meetings, into interviews, into keynote stages. But the edges of it had dulled. Natalie was already seated, a slim folder in front of her. She did not look at him when he entered. Harold Kensington began without pleasantries. "We are here to review the final interim forensic report and determine appropriate governance action." No one interrupted. The lead forensic accountant stood and projected a flow chart onto the screen. Lines spread outward like a map of deliberate detours. Over the past 6 months, he began a total of $4. $1 million in company funds were transferred through layered entities, inconsistent with approved marketing allocation structures. He clicked to the next slide. Of this amount, approximately $1.7 million cannot be reasonably substantiated as legitimate corporate expenditure. Tyler leaned forward. "That's interpretation," he said. "Brand expansion isn't linear." The accountant did not react. Additionally, he continued, we identified digital signature replication associated with one authorization key belonging to General Counsel Natalie Ward. The room stilled. Harold turned slowly toward Tyler. Do you wish to explain that Tyler's pulse pounded in his ears? I didn't replicate anything he said. It was administrative convenience. We share systems. Natalie spoke for the first time. We do not share authorization keys, she said evenly. She opened her folder and slid printed timestamp logs across the table. These records show my credential was used while I was physically in Chicago negotiating merger terms. Silence. One director cleared his throat. Are we discussing forgery? Natalie did not answer. She did not need to. The documentation answered. Harold removed his glasses and placed them carefully on the table. Tyler, he said, voice controlled, you signed our executive governance framework. You approved the dual authorization safeguards. You endorsed fiduciary transparency. Tyler's jaw tightened. I built this company. No, Harold replied quietly. You led it. The distinction settled heavily. Another director spoke. The merger agreement contains executive conduct clauses. Failure to disclose material financial irregularities constitutes breach. Tyler looked toward Natalie then. You'd actually enforce that, he asked. Natalie met his gaze calmly. I drafted it to be enforceable. There was no hostility in her voice, only fact. Harold inhaled slowly. This board cannot ignore these findings. He turned to the directors. Motion to remove Tyler Ward as Chief Executive Officer pending full investigation and to appoint interim leadership. The words were formal, procedural, final. Tyler stood abruptly. You're making a mistake. No one responded immediately, because no one needed to argue. The vote proceeded. One by one, hands lifted. It was not unanimous, but it was decisive. The motion passed. Tyler Ward was removed as CEO effective immediately. He remained a shareholder protected by the very clauses Natalie had structured in the merger, but stripped of executive authority. Harold spoke again. Interim CEO appointment to be announced publicly within 24 hours. Press statement will emphasize governance integrity and continuity. Tyler felt the room narrowing around him. You're siding with her, he said. This is not about sides, Harold replied. It is about structure. The meeting adjourned. Directors exited quietly. No applause, no raised voices. Just footsteps against polished flooring. Tyler remained standing for a moment longer before gathering his things. As he reached the door, he paused. Natalie, he said without turning fully. She looked up. You could have stopped this. No, she answered. I couldn't. He searched her face for doubt. There was none, only steadiness. He left without another word. The public announcement was drafted by noon. Ward Dynamics announces leadership transition following internal governance review. The language was careful, controlled. No mention of misconduct, no reference to divorce. But financial media read between lines. Analysts noted timing so soon after a landmark merger. Speculation began. Natalie remained at her desk throughout the day, reviewing regulatory responses, updating compliance disclosures, ensuring merger integration milestones remained on track. She did not give interviews. She did not issue statements. She worked. At 4:15 p.m., Tyler cleared his office. The framed magazine covers, the innovation awards, the photographs from early startup days. He paused at one image, Natalie beside him in a cramped apartment, years ago, legal pad in hand, both of them smiling at a whiteboard full of projections. He placed it face down in a box. Across town, Chloe read the news alert on her phone. Leadership transition. Her chest tightened. She called Tyler immediately. What happened? It's temporary, he said automatically. But his voice lacked conviction. They removed you, she said softly. It's governance procedure. Silence. Is this because of the audit, she asked. He didn't answer. Chloe exhaled slowly. I need honesty. He closed his eyes briefly. It escalated. That's not honesty. He had no better answer. That evening, Natalie remained in the boardroom with Harold after others had left. You understand this will intensify scrutiny, he said. I do. And you're prepared? Yes. He studied her carefully. You built safeguards that ultimately removed your own husband. I built safeguards to protect the company. The correction mattered. Harold nodded slowly. History will note that. I'm not concerned with history, she said quietly. Only truth. Back at the townhouse, Tyler walked through rooms that felt unfamiliar. The space no longer held authority. It held absence. He poured himself a drink he did not want and stared at the skyline beyond the windows. He had believed power was momentum, visibility, applause. He had not understood that the strongest leverage lay in clauses written years earlier, clauses he had signed without reading carefully. Natalie entered an hour later. She paused when she saw him seated in the dim light. It's done, he said. For now, she replied. You took everything. No, she said calmly. The board made a decision. You guided it. I reminded them of policy. He let out a hollow laugh. You never once yelled. She regarded him quietly. I didn't need to. Silence stretched. You'll be remembered as the woman who dismantled her husband, he said bitterly. No, she replied softly. I'll be remembered as counsel who upheld governance. The distinction again was deliberate. He had mistaken personal loyalty for structural immunity. Natalie had never confused the two. Outside Manhattan continued its indifferent rhythm. Inside, the balance had shifted entirely. Tyler was no longer at the helm of the company he once introduced as his empire. He was now subject to the same compliance systems he had overlooked. And Natalie, still seated at the table reviewing documents under a single lamp, felt no triumph. Only completion of one phase. Because removal from office was not the end. It was procedure. And procedure, once initiated, continues forward. The second court hearing did not attract attention from the press, but within the financial community, it was anticipated with quiet interest. Tyler Ward had been removed as CEO. The merger had closed. And now the personal and corporate threads were converging in a courtroom that preferred evidence over narrative. Natalie arrived with Rebecca Lawson at 9:10 a.m., a slim leather portfolio tucked beneath her arm. She wore no visible jewelry except her watch. Her posture was upright, controlled unchanged. Across the aisle, Tyler looked different than he had weeks earlier. Not defeated, but diminished. Jonathan Pierce leaned toward him, speaking in low, strategic tones. Judge Caroline Mercer entered without delay. This matter concerns expanded discovery asset valuation and potential fiduciary implications intersecting marital property, she stated evenly. We will proceed. Rebecca rose first. Your Honor, since the prior hearing, additional forensic documentation has confirmed unauthorized financial transfers, digital credential misuse, and concealment of offshore accounts tied to the respondent. Jonathan stood quickly. We object to characterization. No criminal finding exists. These are corporate matters separate from divorce. Judge Mercer lifted her eyes. Corporate conduct directly affecting marital assets is not separate from divorce. The room quieted. Rebecca submitted organized exhibits, certified bank transaction trails, digital authentication logs, forensic report summaries, merger agreement to compensation clauses. No dramatic language, only sequence. Judge Mercer reviewed the authentication log carefully. This indicates the petitioner's authorization key was used from an IP address not associated with her location at the time. Yes, Your Honor, Rebecca replied. Jonathan stepped forward. Administrative oversight shared internal systems. Is that your formal explanation? The judge interrupted. Jonathan hesitated. Tyler's throat tightened. Judge Mercer looked directly at him. Mr. Ward, did you authorize use of your wife's credentials for financial transactions? The question lingered. He could deny it, but the logs were precise time-stamped, geolocated. Yes, he said finally. I approved it operationally. Approved by whom, the judge asked. Silence. The courtroom did not react. But the absence of sound felt heavier than objection. Rebecca continued. Furthermore, Your Honor, the respondent's executive compensation under the merger agreement has materially increased marital asset valuation. Full disclosure is required. Judge Mercer nodded. Mr. Pierce, has your client submitted complete equity acceleration documentation? Jonathan shuffled papers. We are compiling. That was not my question. No, Your Honor. Judge Mercer closed the file. This court will not tolerate partial transparency. Expanded financial disclosure is ordered within 10 business days. Failure to comply will result in sanctions. The gavel struck once, not loudly, but decisively. Outside the courthouse, Jonathan's tone sharpened. You needed to be clear, he told Tyler quietly. Ambiguity reads as concealment. I answered, Tyler replied. You hesitated, because the truth had weight. Across the steps, Rebecca spoke with Natalie. He's losing ground, Rebecca said. Natalie nodded. This is structural. You're aware this could escalate beyond civil implications. Yes. Rebecca studied her client. You don't seem surprised. I mapped the risk weeks ago. That was the difference. Natalie had already processed the outcome privately. The courtroom was simply confirming it publicly. Back at Ward Dynamics, the interim CEO, an experienced executive from Titan Global Freight, held his first formal leadership meeting. Governance reforms were outlined. Audit cooperation reaffirmed. Natalie sat at the far end of the table listening. Her role had not expanded theatrically, but her presence carried new gravity. After the meeting, Harold Kensington approached her quietly. The court expanded disclosure ordered, she replied. He nodded slowly. We will comply. Yes, he hesitated. You understand this may transition to regulatory inquiry, I do. And you're prepared to testify if required? Yes. There was no hesitation. Because for Natalie, testimony would not be emotional. It would be chronological. Tyler returned to the townhouse that evening to find movers carrying several framed awards out of his former office. Natalie had arranged to relocate personal items to a storage facility. He stood in the doorway watching. Is this necessary, he asked. Yes, she said. We are separating assets. You've already taken the company. I didn't take it. You made sure I lost it. Natalie looked at him steadily. You violated governance. He laughed once without humor. You talk like this is a contract dispute. It is. Our marriage wasn't. No, she said quietly. But the consequences are. Silence filled the hallway. He stepped closer. You could have protected me. I did, she replied. The words unsettled him. You structured the merger to secure your equity, she continued. Without that removal as CEO would have cost you more. He blinked. You're saying you helped me. I'm saying I preserved value. Even now. Even after humiliation. Even after betrayal. She had not dismantled his financial foundation. She had preserved it within law. He looked at her as though trying to reconcile two narratives, the woman he publicly dismissed, and the woman who quietly safeguarded his future. You don't hate me, he said finally. No, she answered. Hate would have been louder, more volatile, less precise. Chloe watched from a distance now. Her sister's apartment felt smaller than she had expected. Media speculation had intensified, not scandal, but curiosity. Influencer partnerships paused pending clarity. She called Tyler one evening. Is there criminal exposure? She asked directly. Not yet, he replied. That's not reassuring. Silence lingered. I didn't sign up for legal headlines, she said. You signed up for a future, he responded. I signed up for stability. The line echoed in his mind after she hung up. 10 days later, Tyler's legal team submitted expanded disclosures to the court. They were thorough, but not voluntary. Judge Mercer reviewed them carefully. In a follow-up order, she noted evidence indicates intentional circumvention of corporate safeguards. While criminal jurisdiction is beyond this court's scope, the conduct materially impacts marital asset division. It was not a conviction, but it was acknowledgement. That night, Natalie stood alone in the guest room, reviewing the order under soft lamplight. She felt no triumph, only confirmation. Evidence had spoken, procedure had followed. Outside, Manhattan lights shimmered in distant reflection. Inside, the final phase was approaching, not explosive, not dramatic, inevitable. Tyler had believed humiliation would wound her into retreat. Instead, it had clarified her. He had mistaken silence for weakness. Now, in the quiet after courtroom proceedings, he was beginning to understand something far more unsettling. Natalie had never been reacting. She had been documenting. And documentation, once entered into record, does not fade. It remains. The public announcement of the merger aired on a Monday morning at precisely 8:00 a.m. Financial networks displayed the headline in measured fonts. Titan Global Freight finalizes $5 billion acquisition of Ward Dynamics. Analysts discussed valuation metrics. Commentators praised the strategic integration. Market response was stable. But buried within the official press release, beneath the quotes attributed to the interim CEO and Titan's executive leadership, was a paragraph that shifted the narrative quietly. The transaction was structured and led by General Counsel Natalie Ward, whose legal architecture ensured regulatory compliance and long-term shareholder protection. It was not dramatic. It was factual. But in financial circles, fact carries weight. Within hours, industry blogs began dissecting the merger agreement's sophistication. Legal journals cited its executive retention provisions as exceptionally well-calibrated. A respected business publication ran a short feature on the deal's legal engineering. Natalie's name appeared without embellishment. For the first time, it stood alone. Tyler read the coverage in silence. He had once assumed the merger was his crowning achievement. Now, he saw analysis crediting the structural genius to Natalie. He scrolled further. One article noted that despite executive leadership transition, the merger remained stable due to robust governance safeguards embedded during negotiation. Safeguards he had overlooked. Safeguards she had built. Across Manhattan, Natalie sat in her office reviewing post-merger integration reports. The recognition did not alter her posture. She did not forward the articles. She did not comment publicly. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Harold Kensington. The board would like to formally acknowledge your leadership at next week's session. She typed back, unnecessary. Focus on integration. He did not argue. Meanwhile, the court proceedings moved forward steadily. Judge Mercer had ordered a final financial summary before determining asset division and potential referral of findings to regulatory authorities. Rebecca Lawson reviewed the compiled documentation with Natalie late one evening. The merger acceleration clause, Rebecca said, flipping through pages, activated equity vesting worth approximately $42 million. Yes, Natalie replied calmly, which remains marital property until decree. Yes, Rebecca studied her. You understand that you are entitled to a significant portion of this? Natalie nodded. I understand. You're not seeking punitive damages, no. Why? Natalie paused briefly. Punishment is not correction. Rebecca watched her carefully. You could devastate him financially. I won't. The decision was not weakness. It was discipline. Tyler felt the walls narrowing in ways that were no longer metaphorical. Chloe had not returned from her sister's apartment. Calls had grown infrequent. Invitations had evaporated. His former colleagues maintained professional distance. He stood alone in what had once been his executive office, now stripped of personal effects, waiting to meet with federal compliance representatives who had requested clarification regarding governance breaches tied to the merger. It was not yet a criminal investigation, but it was inquiry. He glanced at his reflection in the darkened window. He looked older, tired, not from loss of title, from loss of certainty. The final divorce hearing approached. Natalie prepared without ceremony. Rebecca outlined likely outcomes. Equitable division of marital assets, including vested equity. Formal acknowledgement of fiduciary misconduct affecting valuation. Judicial note regarding potential regulatory referral. "Are you ready?" Rebecca asked. "Yes." The courtroom on the day of final determination felt quieter than before. Not tense, resolved. Judge Mercer reviewed the compiled evidence, her tone measured. The documentation establishes that Mr. Ward engaged in unauthorized financial conduct, materially affecting marital assets and corporate governance. She paused. However, this court recognizes the petitioner's contribution to asset preservation and structural integrity. Tyler stood motionless as the words settled. The marital estate shall be divided equitably. Judge Mercer continued. Given the petitioner's direct role in creation and protection of said estate allocation, shall reflect her substantial contribution. There was no applause, no gasp, just arithmetic spoken aloud. Natalie did not look at Tyler when the judgment was finalized. She did not need to. The division was significant, but not vindictive. Rebecca had advised she could pursue more aggressively. She had chosen not to. Outside the courthouse, Tyler stepped forward. "Natalie," he said quietly. She turned. "You won." It was not accusation. It was exhaustion. She regarded him evenly. "This was never about winning. It feels like it. That's because you're measuring the wrong thing." He searched her face for anger, for satisfaction. There was neither. "I didn't think you'd go this far," he admitted. "I didn't think I'd need to," she replied. Silence stretched between them. For the first time, there was no boardroom, no court, no audience. Just two people standing in daylight. "You never yelled," he said. "No. You never begged. No. You just documented." "Yes." He exhaled slowly. "I underestimated you." Natalie's gaze did not waver. "You misunderstood me." The distinction lingered in the air. Weeks later, Titan Global Freight finalized internal governance reforms across all subsidiaries. Natalie was offered an expanded leadership role overseeing global compliance integration. She accepted, not for visibility, for continuity. In Boston, she began preliminary work on establishing a private investment initiative focused on supporting women-led startups in logistics and infrastructure. Not publicity-driven, structured, sustainable. Chloe, meanwhile, finalized separation paperwork of her own. Her marriage to Tyler had lasted less than 3 months. It ended quietly, no public statement, just absence. Tyler retained substantial equity due to the merger protections Natalie had drafted, but he no longer commanded stage or boardroom. His wealth remained. His influence diminished. And in the quiet aftermath, he began to understand something that had eluded him for years. Visibility is not power. Structure is. Natalie had never needed applause to secure legacy. She had written it into contracts. And contracts endure longer than declarations. As winter settled over Manhattan, Natalie packed the last of her belongings from the townhouse. She left behind nothing undone, nothing unspoken, nothing undocumented. The city skyline remained unchanged. But the balance within it had shifted. Not loudly, not theatrically, but permanently. The collapse did not happen in a single headline. It unfolded in footnotes. 3 weeks after the divorce decree, the Securities and Exchange Commission sent a formal notice, requesting clarification regarding executive authorization irregularities tied to Ward Dynamics pre-merger disclosures. It was not yet an indictment. It was inquiry. But inquiry carries its own gravity. Tyler read the letter alone in the apartment he now occupied, smaller than the townhouse, quieter than Chloe's curated spaces. He had retained significant equity just as Natalie had structured. Financially, he was not ruined. Reputationally, the erosion had begun. Jonathan Pierce advised measured cooperation. Provide requested documentation. No editorializing. No resistance, he said during a call. Tyler nodded, though Jonathan could not see him. "I never thought it would reach this level," Tyler admitted. Jonathan paused. Governance breaches rarely remain private after a $5 billion merger. The scale had amplified consequence. Across town, Natalie was in a conference room, reviewing integration milestones with Titan's executive leadership. Her promotion to oversee global compliance integration had been formalized quietly. Her responsibilities expanded. Her visibility remained controlled. Harold Kensington requested a brief private word after the meeting. "The SEC letter," he said. "I expected it," Natalie replied. "Will you cooperate?" if asked. "Yes." "You understand that testimony may reference personal matters?" "I understand." Harold studied her carefully. "You've handled this with remarkable restraint." Natalie did not smile. Restraint preserves clarity. Meanwhile, Tyler's world narrowed further. Investors who once sought his presence at panels now declined invitations politely. Venture funds withdrew tentative exploratory conversations. His name appeared in financial columns not as visionary founder, but as former executive under regulatory review. He attempted to schedule meetings with old allies. Some agreed. Most postponed. In one particularly quiet lunch with a longtime investor, the conversation turned careful. "You were always the face," the investor said gently. "But it seems the structure was elsewhere." Tyler stared at his glass. "I didn't realize how much." "That's the problem," the investor replied. Realization arrived late. At Ward Dynamics, the interim CEO finalized a comprehensive governance reform initiative. Press releases framed it as modernization. Internally, everyone understood it was reinforcement. Natalie drafted updated compliance protocols herself, tightened authorization layers, enhanced digital credential security, real-time audit triggers. She did not reference Tyler's case directly. She did not need to. The policies spoke implicitly. One evening, as snow fell lightly over Manhattan, Tyler requested to meet Natalie one final time before she relocated to Boston. They met at a quiet cafe in Midtown. No photographers, no witnesses. He arrived early. When she entered, composed as always, he stood instinctively. "You're leaving," he said. "Yes." "For good?" "Yes." Silence settled between them. "I've been thinking," he began. "That's good," she replied calmly. He exhaled, once a faint, humorless breath. "You were never trying to destroy me. No. You were protecting the structure." "Yes." He nodded slowly. "And I mistook that for control." Natalie regarded him steadily. "You mistook it for obstruction." He looked down at his hands. "I thought charisma could compensate for detail." "It can't," she said gently. There was no accusation in her tone, only truth. The SEC inquiry had intensified, but not yet concluded. Criminal referral remained uncertain. Tyler lived in a state of suspended consequence. Wealth intact, influence eroded, reputation fragile. "Do you regret any of it?" he asked quietly. Natalie paused. "I regret that documentation became necessary." He nodded once. "That night on the rooftop, he said I thought I was stepping into something bigger." "You were," she answered. He looked up, into scrutiny. The word hung between them. He managed a faint, tired smile. "You always saw further." "No," she said. "I just looked carefully." He swallowed. "I didn't understand that silence wasn't weakness." "I wasn't silent," she replied. "I was recording." The distinction settled heavily. They finished their coffee without further confrontation. When they stood to leave, Tyler hesitated. "I'm sorry," he said finally. Natalie studied him. "For what?" she asked. "For assuming you were dependent." She considered the answer. "Apology acknowledged," she said. "Not embraced, acknowledged." That was enough. The regulatory review concluded months later with formal penalties and civil fines tied to fiduciary misrepresentation prior to merger disclosure. Tyler avoided criminal charges through negotiated settlement and restitution. But the findings were public record. His name was now attached permanently to governance breach, not catastrophic, but indelible. Ward Dynamics stabilized under new leadership. The merger integration succeeded. Shareholder value held steady. Natalie's compliance division became a model cited in industry conferences. She attended few of them. In Boston, she finalized the launch of Ward Initiative Capital, a private investment and advisory firm dedicated to supporting women-led infrastructure and logistics ventures. It was not splashy. It was deliberate. She rented a modest office overlooking the Charles River. No skyline theatrics, no rooftop declarations. Just glass light and files arranged in quiet order. On her first morning there, she opened a new leather notebook. Blank pages, unwritten. She did not write about Tyler. She wrote about governance philosophy, about structural clarity, about teaching founders to separate ego from architecture. Back in Manhattan, Tyler walked past a newsstand displaying a financial journal. On the cover was a headline about post-merger governance innovation. Natalie's name appeared in the article inside. He did not buy the magazine. He did not need to. He understood now. Collapse had not destroyed him entirely. It had corrected him. And correction, though painful, is quieter than ruin. In the end, what fell was not his wealth. It was his illusion, and illusions once exposed do not reassemble. They dissolve, slowly, irrevocably. The final order arrived on a gray Thursday morning in early spring. Not the divorce decree that had already been entered into record months earlier. This was the closing document tied to the regulatory settlement and the court's acknowledgement that all civil matters between Natalie Ward and Tyler Ward had been resolved in accordance with prior rulings. It was procedural. It was thorough. It was final. Natalie received the digital copy at 7:12 a.m. in her Boston office sunlight, just beginning to reflect off the Charles River. She read every page, not because she doubted its accuracy, but because she respected closure, the way she respected contracts line by line. The language was measured, civil penalties assessed and paid, executive disqualification from serving as officer or director of a public company for a defined term, confirmation of equitable asset distribution per prior judgment. No further claims pending between parties. No condemnation. No moral language. Just resolution. Across state lines, Tyler received the same document in his Manhattan apartment. He read it slower. The executive disqualification clause settled heavily in his chest. He would retain equity. He would retain wealth. But for a defined number of years, he would not lead. Leadership had once felt like identity. Now, it was permission. And permission had been revoked. He sat back in his chair and stared at the skyline beyond the window. The city moved without pause. It always did. In Boston, Natalie closed the document and placed it in a secured digital archive. Then she opened her calendar. 3 meetings awaited her that day. 2 with female founders pitching logistics optimization platforms, 1 with a legal advisory group on compliance best practices for scaling startups. There was no ceremony marking the finality of her marriage. No champagne, no symbolic gesture, only work. Around noon, her assistant knocked lightly on the glass door. "Courier delivery," she said. Natalie accepted the envelope. Inside was a single item, the framed photograph Tyler had once turned face down in his office, the early days image of them in a cramped apartment, whiteboard behind them, future unformed. There was no note. Natalie studied the photograph carefully. In it, she saw 2 ambitious people standing before possibility. She did not see betrayal. She did not see humiliation. She saw structure under construction. She set the frame on her desk for a moment. Then she removed the photograph and placed it in a drawer. The frame she kept, empty. Weeks later, the New York Supreme Court held a brief compliance confirmation hearing to formally close the civil docket. It lasted less than 15 minutes. Judge Caroline Mercer spoke in the same steady tone she had used from the beginning. This court acknowledges full compliance with prior orders. The matter is closed. The gavel fell. Natalie stood, nodded respectfully, and exited without hesitation. Tyler remained seated a moment longer before following. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, not aggressively, but curiously. Natalie did not stop. Tyler paused briefly. "Mr. Ward," one journalist called, "do you have comment on the settlement?" He considered the question. "Yes," he said finally. "Governance matters." It was not eloquent, but it was accurate. He did not elaborate. In the weeks that followed, Tyler attempted to reorient his life. Consulting offers arrived, limited cautious. Private equity groups expressed tentative interest in advisory roles that required no executive authority. He accepted one. It was not the spotlight, but it was a beginning. At night, he replayed certain moments in his mind, not the rooftop proposal, not the boardroom vote, but the smaller ones. Natalie asking about authorization logs. Natalie warning about compliance. Natalie saying she trusted documentation. He understood now that she had not been obstructing ambition. She had been reinforcing it. He had dismantled his own safeguards. In Boston, Natalie finalized the first round of investments through Ward Initiative Capital. The companies she selected were methodical, disciplined, structured. During one advisory session, a young founder asked her, "How do you protect yourself when scaling fast?" Natalie paused before answering. "You design systems assuming pressure will come," she said, "not because you expect failure, but because you respect human weakness." The founder nodded, writing it down. Natalie did not elaborate further. One late afternoon, as spring light stretched long across the river, Natalie received a call she did not expect. "Tyler." She considered letting it go to voicemail. Then she answered. "Yes, I won't keep you long," he said. "I have a few minutes." Silence lingered briefly. "I received confirmation today," he said. "The executive restriction timeline." "Yes. I wanted to say something without courtrooms or boardrooms involved." She waited. "I didn't understand the weight of what you built," he said. "Not just legally, structurally." She did not interrupt. "I thought power was forward motion," he continued. "You knew it was alignment." Natalie looked out the window at the river. "It's easier to build attention," she said quietly. "Harder to build resilience." He exhaled slowly. "I hope Boston's good to you." "It is." Another pause. "Goodbye, Natalie. Goodbye, Tyler." She ended the call gently. No anger, no regret, only completion. That evening, she walked along the Charles River alone. The air was cool, steady. She did not feel victorious. She felt aligned. The legal battle had ended without spectacle. The regulatory inquiry had concluded without prison. The marriage had dissolved without revenge. What remained was structure, clarity, a name associated not with scandal, but with governance. As the sun lowered over the water, Natalie paused briefly and watched the reflection ripple. Power, she knew, did not require announcement. It required foundation. And foundation, once solidified, does not crumble under noise. It endures. Boston did not glitter the way Manhattan did. It did not compete for attention. It did not need to. Natalie Ward preferred it that way. Her office overlooked the Charles River, the water moving steadily regardless of weather season or headlines. The glass walls were unadorned except for framed compliance certifications and a single abstract painting in muted blues. No photographs of the past, no visible trace of Tyler Ward, only structure. Ward Initiative Capital had grown deliberately over the past year. Not explosively, not theatrically, deliberately. Natalie had funded 6 women-led logistics startups, each with rigorous governance requirements embedded from day one. Dual signature protocols, transparent capitalization tables, independent audit triggers, digital authorization safeguards that could not be casually bypassed. Founders occasionally joked that her compliance onboarding felt more intense than raising capital. She did not apologize. "Structure is not distrust," she would say calmly. "It's respect for scale." On a quiet Tuesday morning, she sat across from a young founder named Elena Morris, who was preparing to close her first $12 million Series A round. Elena, Natalie said gently, sliding a revised shareholder agreement across the table, add a contingency clause for executive removal tied to fiduciary breach. Elena hesitated. Isn't that extreme? No, Natalie replied evenly. It's protective. For the company. For everyone. Elena nodded slowly and signed. Natalie watched the pen move across paper. She did not feel control. She felt continuity. Across the country, Tyler Ward lived in a quieter rhythm. His executive restriction period had reduced his public presence to advisory roles and private consulting. He retained wealth enough to live comfortably enough to invest modestly, but the spotlight no longer followed him. At first, he resented the absence. Then he began to understand it. Without title, without stage, he had to evaluate what remained. Competence, experience, and a new humility he had not sought but acquired. He occasionally read industry articles referencing governance reform at Ward Dynamics policies he recognized as Natalie's work. He did not bristle anymore. He nodded. One autumn afternoon, Natalie received an invitation to speak at a closed-door governance symposium in Chicago. She almost declined. Then she accepted. The event was private. No press, no live streaming. Just founders, legal scholars, and board members discussing long-term structural resilience in high-growth companies. When Natalie stepped onto the stage, there was no music, no introduction highlighting personal drama. The moderator simply said, "Please welcome Natalie Ward, legal architect behind one of the most structurally resilient mergers in recent history." She spoke for 40 minutes, about policy, about foresight, about designing governance frameworks, assuming human imperfection. She did not mention Tyler by name. She did not reference her divorced she's. She spoke only of systems. During the Quanda, a board member asked, "How do you respond when a founder resists compliance protocols because they believe it slows momentum?" Natalie paused briefly. "Momentum without structure feels powerful," she said calmly. "Until it isn't." The room fell silent, not dramatically, but thoughtfully. She continued. "Compliance does not limit ambition. It protects it from ego." No one applauded loudly. They nodded. That was enough. After the symposium, Natalie returned to her hotel room overlooking Lake Michigan. The water was darker than the Charles, more expansive, less intimate. She sat by the window with her leather notebook open. She wrote, "Power is not the ability to declare. It is the ability to endure scrutiny." She closed the notebook and turned off the light. Back in Boston, weeks later, Natalie received a short email from an unfamiliar address. Subject, gratitude. The sender was Mark Delgado. "I wanted you to know the internal reforms have stabilized everything. Employees feel safer. That's largely because of you." She read the message once, then replied, "Structure works when respected. No elaboration, no sentiment, just acknowledgement." On a winter evening nearly 2 years after the rooftop humiliation that had ignited everything, Natalie stood alone in her office long after staff had left. Snow fell quietly beyond the glass. On her desk lay a new contract, an infrastructure consortium seeking her advisory oversight on a multi-state expansion project valued at nearly $8 billion. Bigger than the merger that had once defined her life. She reviewed it carefully, clause by clause. When she reached the executive conduct section, she adjusted one sentence. Clarified language, strengthened trigger thresholds. Then she signed. No champagne, no announcement. Just ink drying against paper. Elsewhere, Tyler watched snow fall outside his Manhattan window. He had learned to sit with silence, to read documents fully, to question shortcuts. His life had not collapsed entirely, but it had been recalibrated. He picked up a business journal from the coffee table. Inside was a feature about Boston-based investment initiatives, reshaping governance culture. Natalie's name appeared in the final paragraph. He closed the journal gently. There was no bitterness left, only recognition. He had once believed he was leaving a dependent wife for something brighter. In truth, he had stepped away from the foundation that sustained him, but foundation once built does not vanish. It remains, with or without you. On the anniversary of the merger signing, Natalie walked again along the Charles River. The air was sharp clean. She paused briefly near the water's edge. Not in reflection of pain, in acknowledgement of distance traveled. She did not replay the rooftop humiliation. She did not replay courtroom questions. She did not replay the boardroom vote. Those were chapters documented, archived, resolved. What remained was quieter, stability, clarity, integrity unannounced. She turned and walked back toward her office building. Inside, lights glowed warmly against winter dusk. Contracts awaited review. Founders awaited guidance. Structures awaited reinforcement. Natalie Ward had never needed applause to confirm her strength. She had never needed revenge to reclaim dignity. She had allowed documentation to speak, allowed policy to function, allowed consequence to unfold without spectacle. And when the final order closed, she did not look back to ensure anyone was watching. She simply moved forward, quietly, decisively, with the kind of power that does not ask to be seen, only to be respected. Some stories end with confrontation, others end with silence. This one ends with structure. Natalie Ward did not win by shouting louder. She did not reclaim dignity by humiliating in return. She relied on documentation, on governance, on the slow and steady unfolding of truth recorded carefully over time. There is a particular strength in restraint, a particular authority in preparation. Tyler believed power was public declared beneath rooftop lights and applause. Natalie understood power was embedded in clauses, signatures, and foresight long before anyone noticed. And when scrutiny came, structure endured. If this story stayed with you, take a quiet moment to reflect on where you are watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I always read those details carefully. They remind us that integrity matters everywhere across time zones and distances. If you value stories about quiet strength, legal justice, and dignity that doesn't need spectacle, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Not for drama, for perspective. Because sometimes the strongest response is not revenge. It is record. And record once written clearly speaks for itself.